Hey everybody, it's EJ from eyedesyn.com, and today we're going to cover some handy compositing tips to help your 3D from Cinema 4D look right at home inside some footage inside of After Effects. Let's learn how. Alright, so this is the scene that we're going to be using today. I have my little 3D coffee cup character from Cinema 4D, and I want to composite him into this footage I shot of my very messy work desk using my iPhone 6, so not the greatest camera in the world. But right now it just looks like a 3D object just plopped on top of a background plate. And what we're going to do is just cover a few very simple techniques and tricks to try to help this little coffee cup feel right at home in this scene. So first thing I want to do is just jump over into Cinema 4D and just show you how I set up my scene. So I have a couple of takes. I got my main take here, and that is just my normal scene. And the crucial part here is I loaded up my footage into a material, just loaded it into the luminance channel, and then just applied that to a background, and then just hid it from render by just turning on the stoplight to red, and also added a light. So you can see that I have my window here near my desk, and I just placed the light source right where that light would be shining. Another thing I did was try to use my camera in like the focal length to try to match the vanishing point in my scene here, in my footage. And what I did was I tried to use my keyboard here to try to match that vanishing point and that angle. So just try to line up like the line of keys and just try to adjust the rotation here and try to get that focal length looking right so my perspective looked like it fit in this scene. And it's not an exact science. I just kind of tried to eyeball that. And then the last thing I did was created a whole different take that just held the reflection on it. So I can composite the reflection because I'm on a glass table or glass desk. So I just wanted to create a disc right here. And then all I did was applied a reflective black material on here. So just some 84% reflection, not 85, not 83, a precise 84. I just kind of arbitrarily chose that. But you kind of make this how you want, and I just added a little bit of Fresnel and used the glass preset and just kind of adjusted the strength here. But then what you can do is I just rendered this as a separate take, so I can just get my interactive render region here. And once this renders, you'll see that on this take, this will just contain the reflection. So as this is kind of rendering here, you can see for some reason my mouth dropped. I'm not sure what happened there, but that just kind of happened in the interactive render region. It rendered out fine, but that's just some weird bug. The mouth falls off. But you can see we just have the reflection here. So I rendered that out as a separate take. And if we hop into After Effects again, you can see here is just my layer with the reflection underneath my coffee cup here. So that's just the kind of a little bit of pre-setup that I did in Cinema. And you don't need to do that and get so precise as far as like lighting and stuff like that. I just kind of did it just to make it look a little bit better. But basically these techniques that I'm going to be showing you will help you merge your 3D object into video footage, no matter what the lighting is. If it's flat lighting or whatever, these tips will be universal for helping your 3D object fit better into your scene. So the first thing I want to cover is just zoom into the scene here, zoom into our comp, and just kind of go and just choose like maybe this point right here. And basically I want to point out how blurry our footage is, and a lot of this has to do with just the nature of digital video. We have compression, we have some blurriness, and every camera sensor is different. Sometimes the camera sensor will try to pump in a lot of blue hue, sometimes it's reddish hue, sometimes it's green. But right now it looks like we have like a little almost reddish cast. We have some blurriness. We have some sharpening that is happening due to the compression of the video that is just trying to sharpen it a little bit. And then you can see by contrast our footage, our very imperfect iPhone 6 footage, and see just the perfect sharp edges of our cup here. And if I actually render RAM preview this, you can see that we have a lot of noise, blurry noise on our footage, and really no noise on our cup here, except for the ambient occlusion over here. And that was not planned. That just happens to be, I didn't set enough samples in my ambient occlusion here, but it actually works for this scene because it makes it adds a little bit of noise. So what we can do to help recreate the sensor, the camera's digital compression and stuff, because our 3D render is just looking way too perfect as is. So we're going to try to blur it up, add a little bit of noise, and add a little sharpening to try to, make that video compression look like it's applied to our 3D object as well. So what we're first going to do is add a little bit of noise or grain. You can go either way with this. We can add just a little bit of noise by grabbing some noise and maybe making 3%, and just rendering. You can see a little bit of the animated noise happening, but the noise in our actual footage is a little bit different. So what we could do is actually use a different effect. I'll just delete that. And we can use the grain, match grain, and apply that to our layer. And what that's going to do is you can set a noise source layer. So I'll actually use my desk, and we'll set the viewing mode from preview to just the final output so we can see what this noise will look like. And if I just turn this on and off, you won't see too much of a difference. So what I'll do is just up the compensate for existing, and let's just do a RAM preview and see if we can see a little bit of the grain. And I hope you guys can see it's very subtle, but we have a little bit of some of that grain that's in our video, and it's being applied to our 3D object. And it's very subtle right now, so I think what I'll do is go to the tweak, and I'll just up the intensity and really try to overcompensate, because again, this is going to be really hard to see. So I'll just really crank this up a lot. Let's do a RAM preview. Now hopefully you can see that now we have a lot of colored grain on our 3D object, and it's very intense right now, and that's purposefully because I want you guys to be able to see it. But I'll just let this RAM preview a little bit more. But again, we're actually sampling the iPhone 6 footage, and we're sampling that grain and applying it to our 3D object. So you can see now, hopefully you should see that there's a ton of grain now on my little cup there. And if I zoom out, you can see that's actually a lot of grain. So I'm just going to dial this back a little bit to say 1.7. But adding that nice digital grain is going to help us a lot here. So we can actually, if we wanted to, we could add a little bit of noise on top of this as well. So we just add a little bit of noise, maybe just like 1 or 2%, just because we're trying to grunge this up as best we can. Maybe bring down this intensity a little bit more. All right, so we have some grain, we have some noise. Let's just zoom in here a little bit more. So the next thing I want to do is, again, adjust the blurriness and the sharpening that's happening in our footage. So we have our noise, we have some grain. We can go and grab unsharpened mask, unsharp mask, and just apply this. We'll apply this before the grain and all that stuff. We'll just apply this here and make sure it's on top. And what that's going to do is if we crank this up, again, we're just trying to recreate the compressioning and sharpening that's happening with our camera sensor and the compression that it uses. And you can definitely tell if I zoom in here, like the highlights on my Wacom pen, the highlights on my little pen cup thing here, and on this cord and the bottom of my pen cup thing. So we can crank this up a little bit more, and you're going to see the highlights kind of pop a little bit more as well. So I think that's pretty good. We're trying to match the sharpening that's happening in the footage. And then what we can do is just blur this out. So we can go and let's grab our Gaussian blur. And we don't want to blur the noise or anything or the grain, so we'll just apply this. So we'll just blur the unsharpening mask. And let's just try a value of 3 and see how that looks. So you can see that by adding a little bit of blur, we're actually looking like it's fitting into the scene a little bit better. Maybe that's a little bit too much, so maybe 2.5. So I think that's looking good. We can actually bring up our sharpening a little bit more, so there's more of that sharpening coming through. But let's just go and turn off all of our effects and see where we're at so far versus where we were. So here's where we were. Here's where we are now. And you can definitely tell close up that this is looking more like a perfect 3D render, and it's got a lot more of that compression, artifacting, and the blurring and the noise applied to it to really help it fit in our scene a little bit more. And as we zoom out, we can turn this on and off, turn our effects on and off. You can see that's definitely helping out a lot. So that's looking good so far. Let's go ahead and let's start doing some color correction, because right now the colors really don't look like it matches the scene too well. It's close, but what I want to do is utilize some of the elements or the objects in my footage and compare them to pieces of my 3D object here. So the main thing that I'm going to try to match is my keyboard here, which is a white keyboard. It just looks a little bit like a reddish hue is cast on it just because of the camera sensor just adding a little bit of red to that. So the main thing I'm going to use to try to match these two elements here is this info panel. And what I'm going to do is bring this to the percentage view. And what that's going to allow us to do is see the percentage of RGB values in each pixel that we're hovering over using our cursor. So on my cup here, we have basically the blue hue. The blue percentage is the strongest, so red is the least. And if we go to like one of these keys here, you can see that it's actually flipped because red is the highest percentage here and blue is actually the least. So we need to match, get this cup white value a little bit closer to that keyboard. So let's go ahead and just grab, with this layer selected, we will grab a layers adjustment, color correction, actually levels adjustment. I said layers, levels. And we're going to apply this levels adjustment up above the match grain, so and the noise. So after our unsharp mask and our Gaussian blur, there's our levels. So what we're going to do is adjust some of these individual channels here and try to bring back, tamper back the blue and bring up the red. So what we'll do is we'll just go into our blue hue here, and we're just going to try to tamper that down a little bit. So we'll just, let me just turn off my match grain here so I don't see that weird artifacting in my view there. So I'm just going to bring my blue values down. And you're going to see that we're actually making this look a little bit more yellowish almost. So let's go ahead and see what our values are. You can see that just by bringing the blue output white down to like 76, we have now brought that blue value from a percentage of, I believe it was like 89 or something like that, all the way down to like 56. And now you can see that our red is now the actually the second most predominant, second to green. So what we can do is just kind of bring, maybe tamper the green back here as well. So just a tiny bit, because that's a little too much green. So that's looking a little bit better. So now, depending on where we are, our red is the most predominant, followed by green, and then blue. So we can tamp this back a little bit more. So now we're looking good. So now we're matching, we're getting very close to the values on our keyboard. Just a little bit higher, but you can see what's going on. So that's looking good so far. So let's actually go and adjust our, so that's matching some of the colors. Let's actually match some of like the highlights and the darker areas in our shadows. So the one way I like to do that is utilizing this adjust exposure. And what that's going to do is if we crank this up, you can see that a lot of our shadows are getting blown out, but you can see our eyes and the mouth area here are still pretty dark. And to fix that, we'll just have to bring up in our RGB channel, we'll just try to bring up the darkest black values and just bring up the output black to say like 2.7%. And now we can see how that looks by just clicking this little shutter icon here, a little before and after. So that's looking good. We can also test how our darker values are. And I think that's actually our dark values, our light values are looking pretty good. So our highlights aren't too hot. You can see that they're just about as bright as our keyboard here. So I don't think we really have to do any adjustments to our lighter values. So I'll just turn that off. And let me just save this really quick, just so I don't lose anything. And so now what we can do is kind of adjust the saturation, because I think that the saturation of our blue is just a little bit too much. And I just happen to have some blue in my scene. So like this pen and the reflection of my scissors here, you can see that this is a little bit less saturated. So what we can do to do a little desaturation is going and adding a tint. And I'll just apply this after my levels. And I'll just tint this just a tiny, tiny amount. So maybe like 12%, maybe 15. And we can see that if I turn this on and off, it's just a very subtle thing, but we're getting closer to that kind of desaturated blue that I see in my footage. So we can turn our match grain back on again. So I think that's looking good. I think the only thing now is to just copy some of these effects and apply them to our reflection. So we got a reflection right back here, and it's just kind of sitting there. Nothing's changed on it too much yet. So what we're gonna do is just grab the Gaussian blur, the grain and the noise, maybe the tint too, copy that and paste it onto our reflection there. And you can see that that grain's actually a little bit too much on that. So maybe I'll just get rid of the grain on that altogether. Still have the noise. In the tint, I'm going to actually bump up the desaturation on this even more, because for reflections, especially on a black surface, that's already naturally less saturated than the actual original object that's being reflected. So I think what I want to do is just go into my grain on my main cup layer and just bring down the intensity, because that's a little bit overkill. Maybe bring down the compensate for existing, something like that. That's looking good. So let's just go ahead and let's do another comparison. So this is with no color correction or any grain or blurring or sharpening at all. And there's with just a little bit. You can see that just those few little effects with just very tiny values at that too really help to blend our 3D object into our footage. So we're not done yet, because what we can do is, so we've matched a lot of the elements and the colors to our video footage, our untreated and ungraded color graded footage. So what we can actually do now is do a main color grade that also color grades the our little coffee cup guy. So let's go ahead and just create a new adjustment layer, and I'll just rename this color grade. Color correction grade. I don't know. I don't know what is the perfect description for this. I'll just use color grade over color correction. And what we can do is for this, so just like we used a tint to desaturate, what I want to do is actually give like a nice like wash of color to the entire footage to try to unify it even more. So what I'll do is grab a CC toner, apply that, apply that to our color grade adjustment layer, and you can see what that does is just cast this kind of like a goldish tannish hue we can actually change all these values and get like maybe have like a bluish color cast on top of this. So we can just add some values here, some nice hues, and maybe for the shadows, maybe we make this, you know, we can get kind of funky. Maybe we have like a dark red, something like that. And what we can do with that now is just adjust the blend with original. And you can see that just a very subtle like color wash of say 85%, we can just turn this on and off. It's very slight, but just having that nice overall cast to our 3D object in our footage helps to unify it a little bit better. So what that actually does too is, depending on what level you use and what your colors are, is it kind of makes it less contrasty. So what we can do to introduce a little bit more contrast is not a converse, a curves adjustment. There we go. And we'll just kind of do just a very slight S curve on this. Whoops, let's go to our RGB. There we go. So just a tiny S curve. So we're just crushing our blacks and upping our white values a little bit here. And maybe just adjust the midpoint here a little bit too. So just adding a little bit of contrast there, upping our highlights here. And you can see the before and after with that too. So maybe it's a little too dark. And we can even go into individual colors here and maybe introduce, like if we go into the blue, we can have a little bit more blue cast happening here. Something like that. So again, curves on and off. It's a little bit too much. And just adjust all this a little bit here. So we can tweak forever. And if you know me, I love my tweaking, so I'm just going to leave that alone. Now what we can do, so we got our toner, CC toner, we got some curves, add a nice little contrastiness here. What we can do is then, just like we added blur and unsharpening and noise to our coffee cup, we can actually do that to our whole entire scene to help unify it that way as well. So let's go ahead and just add another Gaussian blur. And again, we're going to add this, whoops, go to my color grade, there we go. Add a Gaussian blur to our color grade layer. Repeat edge pixels on. And we'll just give like a very slight blur value. Let's actually zoom in here and see how much that's affecting. So maybe a value of 2. So I like 2. I think a value of 2 is just a pretty good amount. So there's our blur. Let's add some unsharp mask. And again, this is applied on our adjustment layer, so it's going to be applied globally. We can adjust the sharpness here. So we're sharpening our whole entire scene and then blurring it again. Again, helping unify everything. And let's just add some noise, just a tiny, tiny bit of noise. And we'll apply this last, and maybe just a value of like 1. So we'll zoom in here and see. 1's very subtle, so maybe 2. Well, 2's a little bit too much. Let's slice it down the middle, do 1.5. And we can see what that looks like before and after as well. So that helps to unify our entire scene by doing an overall color grade with our 3D object as well. So the one final thing, we can tie this all up with a nice little bow, is add a nice little vignette. And what this can help us do with the scene is, this is just really overblown over here, so it kind of draws your eye over here. So what we can do is add a vignette and try to darken the areas over here and bring the focus to the center of attention, the coffee cup over here. So let's go and just grab a new solid. And I'll just get like a dark blue. And this will just be our vignette. And we'll grab a circular mask and just draw this here. And position it over here by our cup. And we'll subtract, hit F to go to our feather controls. And we'll feather this out. And then we'll just apply a multiplied blending mode and darken that up a little bit. And then what we're going to do is actually place our vignette underneath our color grade, so it's actually color graded as well. And then we can just dial back the opacity of this color grade and maybe adjust our mask a little bit here. You can see before and after there. So that just helps tamper down those highlight areas over here and brings the focus to our little coffee cup. So there we go. We used a combination of tints, curves, levels, Gaussian blur. We used some unsharp mask. We added some grain. We added some noise. And we did those with just very subtle touches and, you know, nothing too heavy-handed with any of these effects that we used. And hopefully you now understand the power of using the combination of the blurs, the unsharpening, vignettes, grain, noise, and just a little bit of those stacked on together can really help tie your CG or your 3D objects into your footage, even if that footage is a crappy iPhone video of a very messy desk. All right, so there's some handy tips to help your 3D renders look right at home in a piece of, albeit very low quality iPhone footage using some effects inside of After Effects. So we covered grain, noise, blurs, unsharp mask, tints, and color correction techniques to help a little coffee cup character look right at home in on top of some footage of my very messy desk. So if you have any questions on anything I covered in this tutorial, leave them in the comments below. I'll try to get to them as fast as I can. If you create anything using any of these techniques, I'd love to see them. I'd love to see some characters on your work desk, so share them with me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagrams, all that good stuff. And if you like this tutorial, please hit the like button. I'd really appreciate that. And I appreciate you, all of you out there watching this tutorial, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye, everybody.